Rabbi, Erev Tov. First of all, we would like to start with a big bracha to Baal HaBayit, Rabbi Yitzchak. Bezrat Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give him big bracha v'atzlacha, siyata d'shmaya gedola, mar kadam v'chatav zikata. Bezrat Hashem, may this home be a home that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will spill out abundance ad belidai. And may this home, Bezrat Hashem, hear the voices and the songs of Kol Sason, Kol Simcha, Kol Chatan ve'Kol Kala, and that this year, Bezrat Hashem, will find his zivug mishor et tishmato amen kinyat. As well as for all the tzadikim and tzadikot, Bezrat Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give everyone big bracha v'atzlacha and a lot of yeshuot. May all our prayers be accepted beratzon. And then we come, Bezrat Hashem, to a place of a personal redemption, a redemption for all of us, for what we all personally need, and a redemption for all Klal Yisrael as a nation, as a people, as a community, and all the aspects that can be a minkinyot Bezrat Hashem. You know, Batay, today we would like to take a little bit of a different approach to a lot of the times of how we structure our classes. We know, Batay, that we are currently in very, very strange times in history. We don't think that throughout the near or even the far history, we've been in the place where we are right now. And being that this is a situation and in a world, in a state that is so new, a lot of the times, not only our reality of how we function on a day-to-day basis is very challenging, but rather also how we structure ourselves and how we structure even the future generations, or our own future, could be extremely challenging. Most of the times when we approach a class or we approach some sort of subject, we look at the subject of what tools can we take that can help us and enable us to manage and to deal with or to overcome certain hardships that we see in our life. So it could be with parnasa, it could be with our faith, it could be with our zivug, it could be with each man, each woman with their own individual problem, with their own individual situation and their own individual place and time of their life. Some sort of method of getting over a hardship. Today, we would like to try to look a little bit further. To look into something that we would say that it's not necessarily what we need, but rather what is important. You know, one time, we sat down with a very, very successful man, and he told us a sentence that stuck with us, and every so often we think of it. And we think it's a very powerful and very important concept that we should all hold on and carry throughout our day-to-day life. You know, a lot of the times our world is so noisy and so much occurs that we tend to put so much importance on what we need in life that it's very easy to lose sight and to forget what is important. Now, usually, the tendency of our life, that what we need tends to be something that is temporary. It feels very urgent. It feels that there is a need to get up and to bring this to fruition or to solve some necessary problem. But what is important to us is usually setting ourselves up for a longer-term success or a longer-term prevention of any sort of problem that it could be. And I think this is very crucial for the entire community that are in a younger age, that are really preparing their life and preparing the future of their lives. We know about that when we get older, we live in the reality that we built for ourselves when we were young. So in reality, our young years, where we are so focused on chasing what we need, it's extremely important to not lose sight on what's important in life. Because like we mentioned, the idea of what a person needs is usually in the now, in the present. Things that are important would usually stay important for many, many years to come. And that is, I think, something that we all, as young people that are setting our own lives up, that are putting our futures aligned, that are preparing our futures, is to not just focus on what we need. Because what we need fluctuates. It changes. What is important stays. What is important doesn't move. What is important allows us to look many more years further down the line in our future. We can even say that when a person aligns what's important in life, it also helps him figure out what he really needs and what he doesn't. We live in a world that has so much bells and whistles and so much conflicting noises and conflicting energies and desires. It's very easy to think that we need certain things that we actually don't need at all. So focusing on what's important in life and establishing what is important within our life can not only help us solve and allow us to achieve what we need, but really clarify what is those needs that are so desirable in that given moment. And that is what Rabotai, we would like to let Hashem try to focus on today. Not necessarily look to come to some sort of solution on bringing to our life a specific need or solving something that is in the now, but rather seeing how us as young people, we can look to set up our lives, to focus on what's important in our lives, to not only adjust our needs, but also to create a longer term happiness. Happiness that will sustain us, happiness that will cause us to have many, many more years of happiness and success and satisfaction, rather than just chasing something that is short term, that doesn't necessarily create a greater impact in our life. We're young for only a certain amount of time. What seems to be important as a young individual runs out very quickly. It tends to be that we are older and more wise, much more time than when we are young. So we find that it is very important at our young age to be ahead of ourselves, to try to see how we can look forward to really set ourselves up for a success, to set ourselves up for a better, more meaningful, more happy, more easy growth of life, as well as transition from one chapter to the next. In order to open up our subject and to open up our class, we would like to try to look at this week's parasha as really the guide, or maybe the place where we can structure this teaching. Before we get into it, we would like to say this class is going to be a little bit deep. It's going to be a little bit complex, but no worries. After the class, we will, Be'ezrat Hashem, accept everybody's questions. So if we hear something that sounds like, where did that come from? There will be a deeper explanation or a more detailed explanation for those who didn't necessarily grasp it the first time that it was explained. This week's parasha, we have one of the most interesting parashot that carry within them maybe the most condensed content that can possibly exist in almost any parasha. We see this week's parasha, Korach, the cousin of Moshe Rabbeinu, gets up and starts some sort of like machloket, some sort of discussion, some sort of a fight within Am Yisrael. Korach was no simple man. The Torah says he was a prophet. He was a tzaddik. He was Talmid Chacham. He was wealthy. Out of him came Shmuel HaNavi. He wasn't any ordinary man that gets up and decides to make a fight, that it goes on with ease and doesn't create damage or impact in the world. Korach, from every single aspect, was a man of great stature. And that's why every act that he did was very impactful on Am Yisrael and the people around him. He was the head of his family, Mishpachat Kehat. So Korach was something that was very unique. Checks all the boxes for a tzaddik, for a man that is proper to lead, for a man that his opinion should be taken with consideration. Korach gets up and he decides that his opinions or his method of leading didn't align with his cousin Moshe. So he decided to make some sort of differences, where we had different opinions on his halakha. When Moshe taught the halachot, for example, that a house, regardless of how many books it has, needs to have a mezuzah, that a garment that has 4 corners needs to have tzitzit. The Torah says that Korach didn't necessarily believe in Moshe's opinion, but rather took his opinion of his own. Now this Rabotai is something that is very, very usual and common within the world of Rabbanim. Rabbanim have different opinions, Rabbanim discuss, they argue, not something that seems to be out of the ordinary. The Torah says that Korach did a big mistake, that he started to talk Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu, where he looked at Moshe Rabbeinu, he told Moshe Rabbeinu, Bnei Yisrael are a nation of tzaddikim. Why are you trying to lead? Why are you trying to be a Rav? Why are you trying to be a leader? Sit back. Hashem is so connected to all of us as a nation. Let people manage the way people want. They are smart. People at that generation ate from the man. The man in his essence, Zohar Kadosh says, was like a connection to the highest levels of information that can possibly exist. The generation of the Midbar, we even call them Dor De'ah, a generation that was connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a level that no generation was like it. So Korach had an opinion, which seemed to be what? Very reasonable. Kol HaKahal Kedoshim, everybody is holy. Why lead? Lama titnaseu? Why try to be some sort of Rav, some sort of man of statue, at the time when everybody are directly connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself? Torah says that the effects of Korach and his desires to change up management created big destruction in Am Yisrael. To the point where it says that Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom got up, the man which is humble, the man that is soft, the man that only asks for mercy on Am Yisrael, gets up and goes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want you to punish this Korach. But don't just punish him with a little hardship and parnasa or something simple. The Torah said that Moshe Rabbeinu told HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want you to create a new creation, that with that creation you will punish him. Or in simpler words, create a punishment that doesn't exist. It seems that Moshe was being cruel. He wanted Hashem to get creative with the punishment of Korach. That's a question of its own that we'll get to in one moment. Establishing that, we see that Korach maybe seemed to be not that much of a good man, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu ended up coming through to Moshe's desire and creating a new creation, which what we call Pi Haaretz, the mouth of the earth, that swallowed Korach and created like this bubble of a new form of realm, or whatever you want to call it, in which Korach exists. Until today, the Zohar Kadosh is alive. But the Torah says, Korach's story doesn't end there. Korach's story will have a very, very positive ending. And Korach's story will be a story that we will all be able to see the next step with our own eyes. Which is what? Chazal say that at the time of the Geulah, at the time of Mashiach, Korach will be pulled out of this hole that he was buried in alive, and he will be put in the position of Kohen Gadol, where he will lead once again, and he will hold a position of greatness, of stature within Am Yisrael. When we look at this whole story, Rabbatai, we come to a few questions. First of all, what was so bad about what Korach did? We see throughout history, Rabbanim always argued, they always had discussions about halakha. It doesn't seem like it was something that is worth or worthy of being punished for. It's a normal thing for people to argue in halakha, to have different opinions within the idea of laws of Torah. It's not a sin. It's not something that is even worth being punished for. It's not something that a person deserves to be punished for. So the first question that we came up with is, what was so bad about what Korach did? What was so destructive of the doings of Korach that allowed HaKadosh Baruch Hu to punish him with such a severe cruelty, you could even look at it? That's number one. Number two, from where does this azut, from where does this cruelty on Moshe's hand, which he is the man of kindness, the man of mercy, the man of humility, the man that loves Am Yisrael, that suicided himself, he gave his life, his neshama for Am Yisrael, at every turn. Where does this strength and this azut, you can even call it chutzpah, to come to Hashem and to say, Hashem, don't just punish him, but create a new creation for him? Create a new punishment? Create a suffering that will be unique, that no one ever suffered until this point with? That doesn't sound like Moshe at all. That doesn't sound like an act of a leader. It doesn't sound like an act of a tzaddik. Something is missing in this story. And lastly, if Korach was so bad, and he was so cruel, and he was so destructive, why do we say that at the time of the Geulah, Korach will be brought back, and he will lead within Am Yisrael as the tzaddik he was before he made this fight, before he made this machloket, this lack of peace within Am Yisrael? If you're saying he's Rasha, Rasha should lead. And if you're saying he's tzaddik that should lead, why is he being punished right now? So really, Rabotai, this parasha is a parasha that holds a lot of questions, holds a lot of content. And we would like to try to see what we could extract from this week's parasha to come to a deeper understanding of how we could find priority in our life, and really reached to a place of setting ourselves up for many, many, many years of success in this world, as an individual, as a woman that is planning on building family, and any aspect that can possibly we could desire. So in order to understand this, we would like to maybe try to look at last week's parasha just as a context, to try to open up a little bit of the connection between them and a little bit of more understanding on what's happening this week. Last week we see that Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom does something very unique. He sends these spies in a very, very short manner. The Torah says he sent these spies to look at Eretz Israel, and with one of his requests he tells them, look for a tree. And when you find this tree in Eretz Israel, come back and write a report on how Eretz Israel is structured. The Torah doesn't say what tree it was. And what is this concept of Moshe asking the spies to find a tree? Sounds very ridiculous. Sounds very not like Moshe, that is so precise and so direct and so calculated to ask them to look for a tree. Hayesh ba'etz ba'aretz doesn't make sense. So in order to understand this, last week we brought a Baal HaTurim, which is a beautiful explanation that talks about what was the idea of Moshe's sending of these spies. Where he opens up by saying that if we look at the first words of the parasha, it says Shelach lecha anashim. The last letters of that sentence, the word forms chacham. What is chacham? Well, that within Moshe's decision there was deep chokhmah, which chokhmah is like wisdom or knowledge hidden behind what Moshe was trying to accomplish. Now we all know that Moshe Rabbeinu was truly a chacham. He was truly wise. He didn't just hold a wisdom of this world of knowing how to lead, knowing how to function, knowing how to make people calm as a leader of a nation, but rather he also held what we call in the language of the Torah, chokhmah elyona, a higher form of information, a higher form of knowledge, the knowledge that we try to achieve with our study of the Torah HaKadoshah. But the Zohar HaKadosh says that this idea of chokhmah actually goes much deeper than what it is just being smart, spiritual. Rather, chokhmah was the foundation in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created and put together our world. The Zohar HaKadosh says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was forming the world, before every plan, before every building that is built, what do? You sit down and you plan. This plan doesn't necessarily need to be building a miniature home, of course, but this plan sits where? It sits on a piece of paper or in our minds. Any person that does construction, which is most of the Israeli men that are here probably, know that before every single plan, before any single change that a person is building or creating, he needs to have the plan. You can't just go and put a stick plus a stick and then...
Unless you're in Mexico.
Unless you're in Mexico, exactly. You can spill a few things together and hope that the Rat looks like a building. So before anything is built, a plan must be formed. Zohar HaKadosh said that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was forming this plan of the world, within his heart he was very, very precise of creating a perfect world. Creating a world which would be the utmost of highest of possibility for man to live in a world of perfection. Hashem saw that in that perfect world there is a place, a purpose, and a need not just for good, but rather for what? Rather for a left side, an entity that would represent something negative, something not so good. And this is this idea of balance, that within every single good creation, there must have balance between strength and softness and rigidness and also flexibility to allow anything to exist properly. So the Zohar HaKadosh says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was creating the world, he understood that in order for the world to function and to allow man to be a creator of his own, to have freedom of choice, which is this idea of balance of good or bad needs to exist. So Zohar HaKadosh says that what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? Immediately, he took that desire of creating this world of good and bad that essentially live and exist simultaneously, and he projected it and he put it together in a physical manner. Zohar HaKadosh says That was the material that we read in the Torah as Tohu Vavohu. What's Tohu Vavohu? Anyone that read Parashat Bereshit knows that before Hashem created anything, there was a reality of just Tohu Vavohu. What is Tohu Vavohu? Tohu Vavohu is what we can call in Hebrew balagan. In what sense? In the sense that there is light and darkness mixed. Like what Rashi says, that Hashem in the beginning created light and darkness be'irvuve, meaning the light and darkness are not two entities, but rather one that were mashed up together. Water and earth were mixed together. Fire and air was also a part of that mixture. It was essentially all what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted in His world, but it came out what? Like one big mush. Now, in Hashem's heart, the good and the bad, the light and the darkness, it's all good. It's all positive because it all holds a place within reality. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew that Bnei Israel, man, can't exist in such a state. So He started the creation of the world. And that's this idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara et ha'olam b'chokhmah. What's b'chokhmah? It's that same word that we used a few moments ago that Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom was able to achieve. What is chokhmah? Chokhmah, like I mentioned, is intelligence. But the intelligence to do what? Zohar Kadosh says, chokhmah is this concept of the intelligence to separate between good and to separate between bad. Where the idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu creating the world, b'chokhmah, was this idea of separating all the mixes of things that He put together and making different entities. And the analogy can be given in this manner. If a man has no chokhmah, no intelligence, you give him a banana, what is he going to do? He's going to take the banana, and he's going to just put it in his mouth and start chewing on it. What's going to end up happening? He's going to choke, and even the good part of the banana will turn what? It will turn bad. If a man is intelligent, that intelligence enables him to separate between the good, to separate between the bad, and allow him to take from this world the good pieces and extract them. Zohar Kadosh says that was the whole creation of the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu extracting light out of darkness. That's the idea of Vayavdi Elokim ben ha'or leben ha'choshech. Separation between good or bad, separation between up and down, separation between good or impurity and impurity, separation between all the entities that HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashed up all together as one. Zohar Kadosh says that essentially was our job. The job of man was to continue what? To continue HaKadosh Baruch Hu's quest in this world. Which is, his quest was what? To separate between good and to separate between bad, to separate between light and to separate between darkness, and to continue his task. That's what we say every single day. Asher yatzar et ha'adam b'chokhmah ubara bo mikavim mikavim chalulim chalulim. Man's body was created b'chokhmah. What is chokhmah? It enables us to separate between good and to separate between bad. That chokhmah was embedded in man. That our body has now the intelligence and the capability to separate between what pieces should go up, what pieces should go down, what pieces should stay, what pieces should go. Which again is chokhmah, enabling what? Enabling separation. Zohar HaKadosh says that Adam's job was to continue that separation. Where you ask? So Zohar HaKadosh said something scary. It said it was to continue that separation with eating of the tree of knowledge. Where the Zohar HaKadosh says that when Adam HaRishon was born, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took Adam HaRishon and he told Adam HaRishon, Adam HaRishon, your job in this world in which you could gather merit and gather points for mitzvot is to continue separating. The only problem was, at that state of the world was perfect. The world held no blemish. And I'm going to give a few words that I want everyone to hold on to at the end of the class. Arizal explains it in the manner that the world was in a circular manner. What's circular? Circular is something that has no beginning and has no end. It has no top and no bottom because it's just circular. So if you twist it, the top and the bottom no longer stay the top and the bottom. The circular has no high points and no low points. The circular represents what? Represents something that is perfect. Something that has equality from every manner that can possibly be. At that state, in that point of the world was in an aspect of circular, which means what? Which means the world was perfect. Hashem's presence filled the air of the earth like there was no manner that we could compare to, that we could understand. To the point where Adam was able to talk to Hashem face to face. Hashem was everywhere. Hashem was able to be seen everywhere. Hashem can be communicated from everywhere. The world didn't necessarily have boundaries. People lived eternally. It was truly, if we can try to imagine it, like one young man said in our class, like a utopia, something like that. Perfect world. So where would the separation be? The question could be asked. So Hashem said the tree of knowledge. Why the tree of knowledge? Because the name of the tree of knowledge in the Torah is not even the tree of knowledge. That is the shortcut of our translation. The real name of the tree of knowledge, it's Etz Hadat Tov Vara. What does that mean? Tree of knowledge, good and bad. Where Hashem left one place in the world where good and bad could exist as good and bad. Because in that state of the world, there was no bad, the world was perfect. One place in the world that good and bad could exist as good and bad, and to allow Adam to sort through that good and that bad that exists, and to gather merit by continuing the job of Hashem of separating between good and separating between bad. The condition that Hashem told Adam was that before you eat from the tree of knowledge, wait for Shabbat to start, and at Shabbat time there is no harm that can be done to a man. Shabbat imilizok, no harm can be brought onto a man on Shabbat, and eat from the tree of life, where there are two trees that were planted in the garden. One was Etz Chaim, tree of life, which is the Torah. One was Etz Hadat, the tree of knowledge. The tree of Chaim, tree of life, is also compared in many places in the Torah as Chokhmah. When you study Torah, are you gathering coins, or are you gathering bottles, or are you gathering wisdom? Gathering wisdom. So the tree of life in its essence is this Chokhmah. What's the Chokhmah? Chokhmah enables us, intelligence, to separate and to identify between good and to identify between bad. So the idea was simple. Adam, wait for Shabbat, eat from the tree of life, gather Chokhmah. When you have the Chokhmah, eat from the tree of knowledge. It's a mitzvah. But at that point, when you eat from the tree of knowledge, you will not get confused, and you will do that separation. You will be able to identify. You will be able to continue his quest of separating between the positive, darkness, light, good, bad. Adam was courageous. He was young. He was ready to get into the world. And he decided to skip a few steps. He said, you know what, I don't need the tree of life. I'll just jump forward, take from the tree of knowledge, and I'll be fine. I'll figure it out as I go. Zohar Kadosh said, as a result of that, he essentially unleashed good and bad out of the tree of knowledge and into the world. Where until that point, there wasn't good or bad, and now there was a reality of the world having good within it, and the world having bad within it. And the problem is that the world having good and having bad, without chokhmah, without the ability to separate, brings us to a place like the man that doesn't have intelligence, and he eats the banana with no peel. He ends up taking the good and ruining it, and taking the bad and mixing it and making it one big balagan. And that's what Adam did by the tree of knowledge. He mixed good and bad. He created the world in a state where we don't have the ability to separate between this good or bad. And our job and our tikkun is to continue on for many generations and to do a birur, to do a separation. And that's a deep class that we're not going to touch right now. This idea that when Bnei Israel were sent to Egypt, they went to gather, who can tell us? To gather what? To gather nitzotzot. What's nitzotzot? To gather the sparks. We're not going to get into it, but in a very, very one-sentence summary, they were sent to do a birur, to do a separation, to take the good out of the bag, to take the little diamonds that were hidden and buried in the dirt. As a result of the eating of the tree of knowledge, something else occurred. And that was what? And that was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could no longer occupy the world and be present in the world in the manner that he was in before the sin. And what meaning? Zohar HaKadosh says that, as we know, there is a name for Hashem. And that name is Ein Sof. What is Ein Sof? Unquantifiable, infinite. Something that cannot be measured, something that cannot be capsulized. When Hashem created the world, He created some space, but even though there was some space, He inserted Himself within it. Or in simpler words, even though it was a physical world, we had an infinite power that was available. And we can see it in a very simple manner. We were born and never supposed to die. Hashem was present in a manner that it was, like we mentioned before, ununderstandable. Hashem, with the creation of the world, with the creation of Adam, did something that is a little bit hard for our minds to understand, which was He inserted Himself, an unquantifiable, you can call it Chas Shalom to say such a thing, but like being, and we're only saying that for our ears to understand, not necessarily that we're putting a shape on Hashem, but He took an unquantifiable being and He inserted Himself in a world that has quantity. That's what allowed the world to be so blessed. Adam was humongous. Adam shined light. There was purity everywhere you looked. Hashem could be present everywhere. There was infinite influence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every single place in the world. After the sin, Hashem was afraid that infinite power, that infinite abundance would be used by bad people, and that would cause more destruction than good. So what did Hashem do? He secluded Himself. He retracted Himself from within the world, and He allowed the world to do what? To be empty. To be with lack of His presence. And this really explains the next few generations. We know that generation of Adam HaRishon was a generation of idol worshippers to the highest extent. 10 generations in a row. Then after Adam HaRishon, Noach seemed to be like a good man. Hashem said, you know what, I'll give it another try. Put faith in Noach. Then again, 10 generations of badness. To the point where in the end of Parashat Noach, it said that Hashem was disgusted. He said this world turned out to be such a bad mistake, chas v'shalom, where He wanted to abandon it. And that left space for a lot of idol worshippers to get up and say Hashem is no longer present. And even if Hashem was present at a certain point, how can an unquantifiable being be with what? Be within a quantifiable world? It doesn't make sense. And that really fueled a lot of the idol worship that came in the next generations to be. And then came a man, a simple boy, that changed the world completely. And that man was who? That man was Abraham. Where Arizal says, if we take the word Abraham in numerical value, comes out the word, the numerical value of what? Of mitzvot, or mitzvah. What's mitzvah? Good deed. Where Abraham performed a deed that gave HaKadosh Baruch Hu the hope that what? That the world can be balanced and could be fixed in a manner like what it was beforehand. Circular. After the sin of Adam, what Hashem did is He took the world and He made it linear. We will explain what linear is like. Linear is like this pen. The pen has an up, has a down, has a beginning, has an end. It's something that is quantifiable, something that is not like linear, which is perfect and equal from every aspect. Avraham Avinu alav shalom performed the deed that allowed HaKadosh Baruch Hu to regain his hope within the world. What was that deed? It was a mitzvah. Where mitzvah, Chazal say, not get into it with too many detail. If we take the first two letters and we do it in Atbash, we're not going to explain what Atbash is. We put it in Atbash, it's Yud K, the last two letters are Vav K. In simple conclusion, mitzvah in its essence is bringing down the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into an act. But that descent of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to in a specific act, a specific deed, helped HaKadosh Baruch Hu come to a place of realizing that there is hope. Why? Because within that mitzvah, a man was capable of doing what? A man was capable of bringing down that infinite presence of Hashem in a very, very small, quantifiable space. And that's essentially what the mitzvah that we receive. When we do a mitzvah, we don't just do a deed that is limited to the effects of our physical deed down here, but rather our mitzvah brings that infinite presence of Hashem that is Ein Sof, unquantifiable, endless, down to our physical, capable, graspful, quantifiable world. And here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu started the quest of seeing a path in which the world could be fixed. A, Bnei Israel, separating between the good or between the bad, the sparks. And B, through good deeds, slowly by slowly, pull down Hashem's presence from one item to the next, from one place to the next, from one home to the next. And as a result of that, there is a chance, there is a possibility for Hashem to do what? To return the world from a linear state back to its what? To its circular state. As we could imagine, Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom knew all this. And he knew that in order for Bnei Israel to function, they would have to accomplish and they would have to overcome two major things. First of all, being able to separate between good or between bad. And second of all, being able to not only separate between that good or bad, but to be able to understand that even Hashem, an unquantifiable leader, will shrink himself and bring himself down even to the smallest acts that we do in our day-to-day life. And as a result of that, connect ourselves to an unquantifiable energy, an unquantifiable power, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom pulled so and did so in every manner he could, knowing that Bnei Israel were in a very, very bad situation, we call it. Why so? Bnei Israel, as we know, in the desert, lived in a world which was what? Which they were babysitted. They were treated like children, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was their father, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was taking care of them every manner that can possibly imagine. Food, even their food didn't have peel. Man, they take it with the peel, with whatever it falls with, take it, put it in your mouth, easy, good. It says in the Zohar HaKadosh that there was ananei kavod, there was these clouds, that even if there was a thorn on the floor, Hashem said, chas v'shalom, that one of the members of Bnei Israel would step on the thorn, the clouds would come and clean the thorns. Moshe knew that Bnei Israel are in a perfect bubble. Now need to enter into Eretz Israel. And in Eretz Israel, they will have to face not only separating and dealing between good and bad, between truth and false, but also fighting to not just take it as a given that Hashem was present within them. Now they need to earn Hashem's presence. Now they need to do mitzvot to conquer the land with Hashem's presence in order to return the world from linear to circular. From a state of the world which there is an up and a down, a beginning and an end, a leader and a follower, a darkness and a light, to an aspect of complete unity, complete perfection. And Moshe did so. In what manner? We see it throughout the entire Torah Kolah. First of all, he's about to send Bnei Israel to enter into Eretz Israel. He sends spies in last week's parasha to do what? Not to take a tour. He sent them to look for one item, which was what? A tree. What is this tree? So it's obvious that he didn't just send them to look for a random tree. That tree had more value. It was more deep behind it. What was so deep about this tree? So like we mentioned, before separating of good and bad in the tree of knowledge, Hashem asked from Adam to eat from what? From the tree of life. And with the eating of the tree of life, the chokhmah, the presence of Hashem within a man's conscience, within a man's mind, will allow him to identify and to separate between the good and to separate between the bad that exists what? Where? It exists within the tree of knowledge. Moshe said it's very simple. Bnei Israel are entering into a land that has good and bad mixed together. Until today, there's good and bad mixed together. You go to Yerushalayim, you see one thing, you go to Tel Aviv, you see it next. It's a big salad. Moshe said, how am I going to prepare Bnei Israel to deal with such a separation? So it was very simple. He sent those spies to find the tree of life. What's the tree of life? The Torah, presence of Hashem. And Moshe said, if you find presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with that presence of Hashem, with that knowledge, with that chokhmah that they will achieve, dealing with Eretz Israel would be very easy. Separating between the good, separating between the bad, needing to function in a world and not just being babied by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will be possible now that they have the chokhmah to peel a banana. To take the bad, throw it out, to take the good, and to consume. Moshe in every place was trying to set them up to enter to Eretz Israel, to be successful, to deal with reality, to be able to fight the challenges of this world. We even see that by him building the Mishkan. Moshe was very stubborn building the Mishkan. Very particular and very, very obsessive, you could even call it, on how the Mishkan was built and how the Mishkan was. The Mishkan symbols what? The Mishkan symbols a building. And like in Parashat Terumah, has a lot of measurements, very technical, but that technicality means nothing when Hashem is present. Because once Hashem's presence ascended and came down onto the Mishkan, once the Shekhinah was present within the Mishkan no longer held a creation of quantity, size, measurement. It was above quantity, size, measurement, being that any good deed, or like what we just mentioned, mitzvah, brings down the Ein Sof, the power and the sweetness of Hashem that is unquantifiable, into a quantifiable world. Or in other words, being that we have a world that is good or bad, creates more good in the world, and the more good that exists in the world, the more Bnei Israel can function, can flourish, can be better. The Mishkan in every single aspect was what? Was a building that was physical, was tangible, but when Hashem was present, it lost all of the concept of tangibility and all concept of size. To the point where even the Midrash says something that many explanations thought it was a mistake, where it said that the Mishkan was a certain size. We'll give it a size stamp 40 feet of walking space. Then they filled it up with furniture. And then the Midrash says that after they filled it up with furniture, how much walking space existed? 40 feet. But how? You just filled it with furniture. No. When the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was present, was within a place, when we bring Hashem into our life, we get something which is above the nature. We get presence which goes above logic and sense, which Jews have been living with for thousands of years. It doesn't make sense that we're here. It doesn't make sense that we have a country. It doesn't make sense that we still exist. So many people try to get rid of us. We're still here, Baruch Hashem. We're still here with Rabbi Yitzchak. We are all here together. Clearly we have some extra secret. So it's not our hands, it's not our brain. Maybe it's the stubbornness of Jews, but it's clearly a gift that came from a higher place. It was always this ability of us to bring down to a quantifiable world an entity, an aspect which is unquantifiable. So it helped us skip many steps. It helps us really advance in our life, in our day-to-day asakim, our day-to-day duties, when we have this ability to pull down Hashem's presence, which is a unquantifiable presence within our life. Moshe is doing this in every single turn. Moshe comes to Bnei Israel and tells Bnei Israel, I'm going to prove to you that with spirituality, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not the size or the quantity that matters. It's rather the intention to bring Hashem down. Where the Mishkan was even built with what? We say, Echad amarbeh, ve'echad mamit, one that brings a lot or one that brings a little bit, it's the same thing. Haikar sheyichaven et libo leshamayim. It's important that he brings his intentions towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, pure intentions. Because if his intentions are pure and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu, once Hashem comes down to a specific aspect in his life, it becomes unquantifiable. Hashem's presence is unquantifiable. So the small mitzvah could be bigger than the biggest mitzvah. The big mitzvah could be tiny compared to the small mitzvah. This idea of conquering our physical world by bringing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence that once existed so abundantly into our physical world, into our quantifiable world. He did that with the tzitzit. We know that originally the mitzvah of tzitzit was to be one string blue. A lot of the Breslevs do it, but it's more for a custom. It's not really the mitzvah itself. Being that we don't have all the materials to make it the way it's supposed to be. What's the idea? The idea of one string blue, many of the Mekubalim, many of the Kabbalists, they teach that blue represents Hashem in this aspect. That's why the Mishkan was so blue. That's why if we go to any one of the graves of the tzaddikim, you see a lot of them, they're painted blue, light blue. In Morocco, a lot of light blue. Why light blue? It's not because they like the color. Because light blue represents something that is so quantifiable, but also so ungraspable, unquantifiable. Like what? Like the sky. Sky is in our world, a quantifiable world, but you can't even grab that blue. You can't touch that blue. You can't quantify that blue. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in anything that we bring him into our life. We bring him into our life, he brings unquantifiable Ein Sof presence, and then everything we do, anything we do, is blessed in all aspects. And that, on a side note, is really a big lesson for all of us to know that it doesn't really matter about what mitzvot we could accomplish at our place and time of our life, or how big they are, or how much we're able to do, but rather the intention behind it. If there is good intention, even if it's $1, 1 penny, 1 mitzvah, 1 simple good deed, whatever it is, anything, whatever it could be, the intention brings the presence of Hashem that makes the difference. Without the presence of Hashem, nothing matters. It could be a small mitzvah, it could be a big mitzvah. It holds no importance. Moshe Rabbeinu, in every single turn, tried to prepare us. Knew that we're entering into a country that it's not like how it's been in the desert. He needed us to know how to function in a linear state of the world, in a linear aspect of the world. He put judges in place. He created a hierarchy of leaders in place to allow Bnei Yisrael to function, to thrive. That was the job and the purpose of Moshe. But Korach clearly saw things different. Now, like we mentioned, Korach is no ordinary man. He's not a simple farmer. He was tzaddik. He was Talmid Chacham. He was a good man. He will be, Be'ezrat Hashem, at the time of the Geulah, our Kohen Gadol. So what went wrong? What went so terribly that Hashem took him down such a dark path? So maybe we can say that Korach's mistake was that he evaluated the world and he mistaken in which state the world was in. We mentioned, Rabbi, that there are 2 states of the world. Circular and linear. Circular is the time of the world before the sin. Hashem's presence was everywhere. We were all equal. Hashem was able to talk to each and every one of us individually. Our world was perfect. There was no death. It was just a perfect world. And linear is what? Is a world of breaks, of big, of small, of light, of dark. We explained it. Maybe we can say that the mistake of Korach, where he mistaken the world to be a world. Korach, we're talking good about you. Listen. This kid, don't kill him. This kid. No. We always have something that comes. Whoever comes to the classes knows it's always there.
It has a meaning.
Whoever they want to come here.
Just try to escape.
Come to the valley when we do our classes there. Not here. No. This is not normal. Just let it be and yalla. Hashem Ya'azor. So maybe we can say that the mistake of Korach, that he mistaken the world to be circular and thought that the world reached to an aspect and to a state of which it was after the Geulah, when it was what? In reality, when it was linear. And we will explain. It says that at the time of the tearing of the sea, Ra'ata shifcha layam, אשר לא ראה יחזקאל בן בוזי במראה מרכבה. At the time of the splitting of the sea, it says that even the servant slave was able to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the exact same level, or even you can call it higher, than the biggest prophet, Yechezkel ben Buzi, in the highest form of prophecy, which is Mareh Merkava. Or in simpler words, that even the slave that was in the tearing of the sea reached to a level of closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, an attachment with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the slave and the biggest tzaddik, they were what? They were equal. They were the same. They were one. There wasn't a difference between the small, or wasn't a difference between the big. Or in other words, one of the signs of how the world will be at the time of the Geulah. Later on, Bnei Israel received the Torah. They stand in a circle. There is this idea that the Zohar Kadosh says in many places that at the time of the redemption, Hashem ya'aseh machon latzadikim. He will make a circle. It's not really realistically, it's more metaphorically. He will make a circle in which all the tzaddikim will hold hands, and amongst those people will be Hashem himself, and they will do a dance in a circle around the Torah. When Bnei Israel received the Torah, they were where? Were they standing next to a cliff? No. They were what? All around what? They were all around Har Sinai. In what manner? In a circular manner. And amongst all Bnei Israel, that they were in complete unity. Belev echad, ish echad. They were all like one man, one heart. They hear the voice of who? The voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu was present, was nochach, with them, was standing at the house with them. They were able to hear his voice. It says that a man around Har Sinai that was blind suddenly was able to do what? Was able to see. A man that was deaf was able to hear. A man that didn't have a leg suddenly has a leg. Or in other words, signs of what? Of immortality. Of a man that doesn't die. Later on, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us food. That food is a food like a banana that we peel? Yes or no? Man, was there a peel to the man? No. So you picked it up, you ate it. Or in other words, this lack of concept of separating between good and separating between bad. Korach sees that around his day-to-day life, there's not even a thorn on the floor. The world is perfect. The world is at a state that their life seemed to be like it was a little in Gan Eden. Maybe we can say the mistake of Korach, that through seeing all these signs of immortality, of having Hashem's presence amongst us, of having no need to separate between good or separate between bad, at every single level of life, maybe Korach came along and said, now we live in the state of the world. There is no concept of separating between good or bad, because everything is good. There is no concept of needing to bring Hashem within the world, because He's everywhere, or like how it was before the sin. Or in simpler words, Korach really thought that the Geula, the Mashiach, the redemption, happened. And if the redemption happened, and we returned back to a circular state, Korach thinks to himself, and he says, why is this man Moshe trying to lead at a time and place in the world where there is no need for leadership? There is no need for high and low, up and down, light and dark. Everything is good. So Korach's fight wasn't even a fight of trying to make a fight, or trying to make a machloket, or from hatred. But rather he truly wanted to preserve a circular world, a world which Hashem is present, where everybody is equal, where everything is holy, where everything is good. When Bnei Israel were preparing themselves to do what? To enter into a world which couldn't be more different, couldn't be more opposite, which was essentially the preparations of Moshe Rabbeinu alayhi salam. And this Rabotai explains to the dot the halachot that Moshe was teaching. And the discussions between Moshe and Korach. Moshe says, you put a blue string on your tzitzit that represents what? that represents bringing Hashem even to the smallest space, even into a string. Blue, which represents Hashem's unquantifiableness. Koach comes along and says, why? Paint the whole thing blue. If the whole thing is blue, why you need strings? Or in simpler words, if Hashem is present everywhere, why are you trying to make bigger and small? Isn't it supposed to be equal? Like the slaves that saw the exact same presence of Hashem at the time of the tearing of the sea, like the tzaddikim. Why are you trying to make big entities and small entities? Koach came along and said, a house that's full of books doesn't need mezuzah. If there's a place that everybody are tzaddikim, everybody are holy, everybody are walking Sifat Torah, do you really need a mezuzah? You need something to be more special? There's no need for something to be more special. Or in simpler words, Koach thought that because the Geulah already came, separation is not necessary and the world could exist with unity, light, darkness, good, bad, everything conjuncted into one big bowl. And Zohar Kadosh says, that's what Koach did. Koach's damage was that he wanted to cancel this idea of big and small. He wanted to cancel this idea of day and night. That's how far he went. Meaning at the time of the Geulah, I don't think we're all going to be going to bed and waking up in the morning. At the time of the Geulah, there won't be an idea of day and night. Something that our brains don't grasp for right now. But at the time of the redemption, there is no concept of light and darkness. It will be all just good, all just light. Koach wanted to even cancel the day and cancel the night. He wanted to cancel families. He wanted to cancel Kohen and Levi, Israel and Kohen. Wanted to cancel all structures that Hashem put in place to divide the good, to divide the bad, being that he thought that the world was linear, which it was perfect, which it was equal, which it was at one state. That was the mistake of Koach. And only like this we could understand what Moshe says. Moshe comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, punish Moshe Rabbeinu, but don't just punish him. Punish Korach, but don't just punish him. Create a new creation. Who are you, Moshe, to tell Hashem what to do? So maybe we can say, Korach created Tohu Vavohu. He can put everything in conjunction in his life. Light, darkness, good, bad, big, small, everything was mixed. Created essentially a state in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu started to create with, which was Tohu Vavohu. Tohu Vavohu can't exist. So Moshe knew that Hashem needs to create something out of this Tohu Vavohu. So Moshe said, if you're already creating something, if you're already putting something together from this Tohu Vavohu, create something new for this Koach to get him out. He's going to destroy the world. He's going to bring Bnei Yisrael to a place and to a point that they will be unable to separate, identify between good or bad. And they will be unable to bring your presence in the world, being that they think that it's already done. Moshe fought against Koach because he knew that this Koach, if it's with good intentions or bad intentions, he can chas v'shalom create damage that will be everlasting. That we will live in a state that we will return before Avraham Avinu, which there was no hope for the world. And that was the fight of Moshe Rabbeinu. And now we could really understand why Hashem keeping this Koach. He's not getting rid of him. He's keeping this Koach at the time of the redemption, and he will bring him back to be a leader. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that Koach fought with his life. He did Misirut Nefesh to try to preserve what? A circular world. But his mistake that in reality it wasn't a circular world. But Hashem said, what better man to preserve a circular world than the man that gave up everything to have this circular world? So Koach, even though he mistaken at the time, what better candidate to fight for me at the time of the redemption than Koach himself? He is going to fight for a circular world more than anybody. He will stand and lead Bnei Yisrael in a circular world more than any person that could exist at that time. Koach was preserved. And in this manner, we can take this whole balagan of a parasha and make sense of it and put things in place. Now, the question that I think a lot of you are asking is, how does this apply to us? What do we take from this entire conjunction of two parashot, and we went back to before the creation, and we came back here, and then went back again, and then went to deep places for what? What are we supposed to leave, and what tools are we supposed to take from this understanding of a story or a situation that occurred thousands of years ago into our day-to-day life. So in reality, Zohar Kadosh says, our generation is extremely similar to the generation that had the story of Korach. Where our fights, our challenges will be with the exact same magnitude that they needed to fight and they need to overcome with our generation. What's amazing is that our generation and that generation actually share the same name. The name of what? The name of Dor De'ah. The Zohar Kadosh says that from year 5,000 to year 6,000 will be a generation that will be the hardest generation to be. It will be the most challenging time and place for Ben Israel or Bat Israel to function and to flourish in this world. Being what? Being that a generation, Dor De'ah. Who can translate what De'ah means? Knowledge. What is this concept? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, from the year 5001 to 6000, knowledge and intelligence will take over the world. Now, just to remind everybody how long Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was, how long ago? He was almost 3,000 years ago. So 3,000 years ago, he was able to write in the Zohar that from year 5000, knowledge will be present. And that's what we saw in reality. Only in the last 700 years, technologically, consciously, we jump forward in a manner that doesn't make sense. For thousands of years, they lived in one certain way. And from 700 years ago, our life got changed over and over and over and over again. Where we live in a state that we've never been more intelligent now, and never been more wise now than we ever were at any possible generation. That's the similarities between the generation of Korach, the generation of Bnei Israel in the desert, and our generation. That we will have an abundance of information. Information will be present everywhere. That information allowed us to develop what we have around us now. But the word dat, or de'ah, is a very familiar word. Who can tell us where the word dat comes from?
Adam.
Who? Rabbi David, what is it?
They knew each other.
No, but dat. What's this word dat? We just spoke about this word dat. Adam and Chava and what? And the tree. What tree? Etz Hadat. What's the full name of Etz Hadat? Tree of knowledge. Good and bad. With that knowledge, it's good. But that knowledge comes with a big danger. With a big risk. And that is the risk of what? The risk of being unable, or the risk of falling into the trap of being not able to separate between good, to separate between bad. That's what Adam fell to. Adam ate from the tree. And without the chokhmah, without the tree of life that he was supposed to eat beforehand, brought chaos to the world, mixed good and bad to a place where even himself he was unable to identify. We live, Rabotai, in a generation that is so smart. The most smart. But still, it's never been harder to identify good or bad than right now. Where there is a fight. There is a war. The war of what? The war of Korach is occurring in one of our life, in each day that we live. The fight of what? The fight of trying to completely mess up and to destroy the boundaries of good, to destroy the boundaries of bad, to destroy the boundaries of light, and to destroy the boundaries of darkness, to destroy the boundary between a man and a woman, and in almost every aspect in our lives. We live in a generation that da'at, that knowledge, didn't allow us to know what's good or bad, but rather made us more confused than ever. More mebulbal than ever. But with all our abilities, we still can make simple decisions of what's good or bad. And we can all look at that within our own lives. We can all see that within our day-to-day habits. It could be with what is good for your neshama versus what you want in your body. It could be with a person's zivug. All the young, should I try again? Should I not try again? Should I stop? Should I continue? With work, with everything, with ourselves. We're so confused. We don't know what's good for us, what's bad for us, what we like, what we don't like. We're lost. That is the challenge of our generation. The challenge of separating between good and separating between bad, and remembering that we have a capability of bringing Hashem's presence into the smallest acts that we do on a day-to-day basis. Now, Abutai, it seems like a simple task, but there is no harder and more challenging and more uphill task than doing this. And that is, Abutai, really what we believe is what is important in life. What is important, Abutai, that we install within our minds now, when we are young, a set of values, a set of direction of what really is truth, what is really false, what is really good, what is really bad, what do we want in our life, what do we not want in our life, being that what we take and where we steer